In the still grey hush before the sun dared stretch its golden fingers across the plains, the town of Bitterweed Hollow stirred beneath the weight of another dusty day. There were no clock towers to chime the hour, no bells to toll in churches, long abandoned to prairie winds. Only the creak of wood warped by long summers and cruel winters hinted that the world had not, in fact, ended in the night. It was in this tender hour, neither truly dawn nor holy night, that the lanterns, within the dust lantern saloon, still glowed. Yellow and weary, they flickered like fading memories across warped floorboards and crooked rafters. Here, in the town's only place of mirth and menace, the air clung heavy with pipe smoke and ghosted laughter. Outside, Bitterweed Hollow gave no hint of joy. Buildings leaned like tired old men. The streets were bone dry, carved into the earth, by wagon wheels and stubborn hooves. Yet within the dust lantern, the world was still, eerily suspended between last night's sins and today's silent penance. Behind the bar, a woman named May Delancey wiped down glasses that had not been touched since midnight. She was not young, nor was she old, but carried the kind of tired grace that drew the eyes of drifters and the silences of men who had long forgotten how to speak kindly. Her sleeves were rolled, her corset loosened in defiance of respectability, and her hair tucked up like a secret kept too long. May had run the dust lantern for nearly a decade, longer than any man had lasted in Bitterweed Hollow. They came, all of them, chasing gold, revenge, or redemption, and stayed only long enough to lose whatever soul they'd dragged behind them. Only May remained. Her presence, like the building itself, seemed stitched into the land. On this morning, with the whiskey bottles still breathing the sorrows of last night's drinkers, May moved with the rhythm of ritual. Each wiped glass, each straightened chair, a small prayer against chaos. But the dust lantern was no place for peace. It was said, though no one said it out loud, that every saloon in the West carried a curse, not one of witches or devils, but something quieter, something made of grief, spilled blood, and all the songs left unsung by the men who perished beneath the gambling tables or out back behind the privy, their last breaths swallowed by the sound of piano keys and boots on wood. In Bitterweed Hollow, that curse had a name: Cole Ashburn. He was not a legend, not truly, but he lived like one. A gunslinger turned faro dealer, he had taken to the dust lantern like a moth to a dying flame. Tall, gaunt, and almost too calm, Cole had a way of watching a man as though he could see the last page of their story already written. His coat was long and black, his voice a soft gravel, not rough but worn, and his eyes, always his eyes, carried the memory of fire. He hadn't killed anyone in months, not that it mattered. Everyone still flinched when he lit a cigar, still watched their words when they sat across from him at the gaming table. Cole had a talent for unspoken threat, an art born not of cruelty, but of understanding. That in these parts, survival was not promised, and civility was a luxury few could afford. May had once loved him, or thought she might. But men like Cole couldn't be held. They were dust in the wind, always looking east with the sunrise, or west with the storm. That morning, he was nowhere to be found. May paused her wiping, glanced at the vacant stool by the fireplace where Cole often sat when the world was too loud. A cigar stub lay cold in the ashtray. The chair held the memory of his weight, but the man himself had vanished into the haze of dawn. She did not worry. Not yet. Outside, horses nickered in tired protest. Somewhere, a rooster crowed too late to be noble. Bitterweed Hollow began to stir, reluctantly, from its slumber, and with it came the first of the day's patrons. A boy, no more than 17, entered the dust lantern with the air of someone trying hard to be a man. His boots were too new, too loud. His hands shook as he approached the bar. May greeted him without warmth, but not without kindness. "Whiskey?" she asked. He nodded, and she poured. He would not last long here. May could see it already. The dust lantern did not favor the young, but still she poured, and he drank, eyes watering, throat rebelling. Because that was what one did in saloons. They drank, they played, they fought, and if they were lucky, they left with less than a bruise. If they were not, May glanced once more toward the empty fireplace chair. Yes, the day had begun, and somewhere, in the quiet miles of open prairie beyond the hollow, Cole Ashburn walked alone. The West had woken. Long before Bitterweed Hollow had a name, it had dust, and before May Delancey had a name of her own choosing, she had silence. She had arrived in the settlement during a storm that split the sky like an angry god. Rain came down like punishment, and thunder rolled through the hills as though something ancient stirred beneath them. The coach that bore her in from the east was driven by a man who never once asked her name. He seemed content enough to glance at her through his hat brim, and she offered little in the way of conversation. Her dress was plain then, not the deep burgundy she'd come to favour, and her boots, though modest, carried the stains of many roads. She wore a shawl tight about her shoulders, even when the rain let up, as if it weren't the chill she feared, but the memory of warmth. Bitterweed Hollow, at that time, wasn't yet the cracked husk it would become. There were dreams here once. A mining boom had brought in money, men, and mischief in equal measure. Saloons sprang up like mushrooms after rain, each louder and more decadent than the last. The dust lantern, back then, was just another corner barroom tucked between a blacksmith's, forge, and a gambling den that pretended to be a chapel. May walked into it like a woman searching for something, though not a soul could have told you what. The owner at the time was a man called Rook Garvey, known less for his charm than for the pistol he kept under the bar. He'd lost 2 fingers in a poker game gone wrong and spoke with a kind of gravel that came from too many years yelling over player pianos and broken dreams. May didn't speak much, but she cleaned. She poured. She learned the names of men, not by asking, but by listening. Within weeks, patrons stopped noticing her absence from the stage or the tables, only that the whiskey never ran dry, and the mirror behind the bar no longer bore streaks of sorrow. Rook took to calling her Maggie, though she never once said that was her name. Others called her Miss, Darlin, or simply the Red One. After the ribbon she began tying in her hair each evening, a ribbon the colour of drying blood, but it was the winter that claimed Rook and left the dust lantern to her. A fever swept through Bitterweed Hollow like wildfire that December. Men who had survived bullets and betrayal were undone by the weight of ice in their lungs. Rook went quickly, 3 days from cough to coffin, and with no kin, no will, and no clear debts, the saloon simply stayed hers. There was protest at first. Some said a woman couldn't run a saloon. Others whispered that she'd poisoned Rook with something brewed in the still behind the bar. One man, a loud one with too many teeth, tried to push her aside one night, reaching for the till. May did not shoot him. She didn't have to. Cole Ashburn did. That was the night she stopped being the girl behind the bar and became May Delancey, mistress of the dust lantern, keeper of the keys, and the last voice many heard before falling asleep, or falling dead. Of course, Cole didn't stay after that. He left for months at a time, always returning with more silence than stories. But each time he returned, the dust lantern was still there. May was still there, and the fire behind the bar still burned. May never spoke of the life she had before, Bitterweed Hollow. She never mentioned if there was a family waiting for her elsewhere, or a man who had once held her hand in churches or in war. But she carried with her a small wooden box that she kept beneath the floorboards in her room upstairs. No one had seen its contents, not even Cole. On quiet nights, when the saloon emptied early and the wind sighed through the chinks in the wood, May would sit alone with that box. Her fingers would trace its edges like a rosary, lips parted slightly, eyes far away, as though remembering a song she once knew. Sometimes, late into the candle's last flicker, she would hum. It wasn't a tune anyone recognized, not a ballad or hymn or lullaby, just a few low, curling notes that seemed older than time, a sound that could soothe a fever or lull a grieving heart to stillness. May never claimed to be kind. She didn't smile easily, nor suffer fools for long, but she was fair. And in a town like Bitterweed Hollow, fairness was rarer than gold, dust and more precious than whiskey. She kept her girls safe, the ones who danced and sang and flirted with strangers for coin. She kept her doors open through drought and war and the long summer of silence when the mines finally dried up. And when men wept into their drink, she did not mock them. She simply poured another and let the night take what it would. May Delancey was no outlaw, no preacher, no hero, but in the story of Bitterweed Hollow and in the shadows of the dust lantern's walls, she was something rarer still. A woman who stayed, a keeper of sorrow, and perhaps, just perhaps, a mother to all, those broken men who never learned to say goodbye. The sun never rose quickly in Bitterweed Hollow. It had to fight its way through the curtain of dust and memory that clung to the valley like an old man's coat. Shadows stretched long across the land, and light arrived more as suggestion than promise. Cole Ashburn moved beneath it like something carved from smoke. He did not ride. Not anymore. His horse had died somewhere in Arizona territory 3 years back, and he'd not taken up another. Some said it was out of guilt. Others whispered he'd grown too weary to carry the weight of another breathing soul. Whatever the reason, Cole walked. Always. The boots on his feet were worn smooth at the soles, soft like hooves, and barely made a sound as he crossed the hard-baked clay. He carried no pack, only a small tobacco pouch and the long black coat he never seemed to remove no matter the season. His guns hung low on his hips, not like ornaments, but like old debts. There was a reverence to the way he wore them, not as a threat, but as a man might wear a wedding band after the funeral. A memory, a wound that never healed right. Cole didn't talk much. He never had. It wasn't shyness. It was something deeper, a kind of silence that was chosen, like a monk takes a vow. But his eyes spoke in place of his mouth. They told stories he never dared voice. When he looked at a man, it was like reading the last paragraph of a book before turning to the first page. People didn't ask Cole about his past. They didn't need to. The air around him was thick with the residue of violence. Not anger. No, not that. But the kind of violence that came from precision and necessity. A quiet, clinical destruction born of someone who understood the weight of each pull of the trigger. Once, in a mining camp west of Santa Fe, a bounty hunter had pressed Cole for his name. "You Ashburn?" He'd sneered, fingers twitching near his holster. "Heard you was quick. Let's see how quick you are after 2 whiskeys." Cole didn't answer. He just took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaled like it was his last breath, and laid the man in the dust before the match that lit his smoke had even died. No one buried the bounty hunter. They just left him there, face to the sky, eyes wide in disbelief that death had come so quietly. Cole moved on. He always did. But it was in Bitterweed Hollow that something shifted. Not in the man. He remained as stone, but in the way the world met him. May Delancey never flinched around Cole. She didn't fill the silence with chatter, didn't ask questions when he returned after weeks away, caked in desert wind and regret. She just nodded, poured him his drink, no more than one, and let him sit. That chair by the fire, now cold in the morning's breath, had molded to his frame. The cushion was sagging where he leaned. The wood wore the imprint of his coat, and when he wasn't there, it was as though part of the room went missing. No one dared take that seat, not even when the saloon was full and chairs were scarce. There were rumors, of course, that Cole had once been a Pinkerton agent turned rogue, that he'd killed his own brother in a duel gone wrong, that he had a child somewhere in Missouri, left behind with nothing but a silver coin and a prayer. None of it was confirmed. Cole never corrected them, because to correct was to confess, and Cole Ashburn did not confess. In the dimness of morning, long before the lanterns were snuffed and the piano was uncovered, Cole would sometimes step outside the saloon to watch the sky lighten. He never looked at the sun, just the color of the clouds, the way the light edged them like fire beneath smoke. It reminded him of something. A woman, maybe, or a fire he hadn't put out in time. He once told May, in a rare stretch of speech, "The sky don't change much. We do. It just watches." She hadn't replied. She didn't need to. In that moment, Cole had said more than in the years she'd known him. There were nights, those cold, haunting ones in late March, when the wind brought sand and sorrow from the high cliffs, when Cole would sleep in the saloon, not in a bed, just there, beside the hearth, hat tilted forward, hand never far from his pistol. He never drank more than one glass, never touched the girls, never gambled, though he dealt cards with the calm of a man reading scripture. He didn't laugh, didn't dance, and yet people listened when he spoke, if only because it happened so rarely. Men who crossed him rarely did so twice, not because of the gun, but because of the look in his eye, a look that said, "I've already imagined how you'll die." Cole Ashburn didn't belong to Bitterweed Hollow, but for reasons even he couldn't name, he always returned to it. Perhaps it was the quiet, the kind that matched his own. Perhaps it was May, or perhaps, just perhaps, there was something about the Dust Lantern Saloon that felt like the only place he didn't have to carry the weight of all the lives he'd taken. The world called Cole Ashburn many things, but in Bitterweed Hollow, he was just Cole, and that was enough. They gleamed in the soft morning dust like sore thumbs on a dying hand, polished, stiff, and almost proud in their ignorance. The leather hadn't yet creased with the burden of miles, nor scuffed from gravel or guilt. Each step he took across, the saloon's warped floorboards echoed with a sharpness that made men glance sideways. He was young, 17 perhaps, maybe less if you looked beneath the bravado in his brow. His hat, broad-brimmed and borrowed from better men, sat awkwardly on his head. It cast too long a shadow across eyes that hadn't yet learned to lie. His shirt was tucked tight, vest buttoned high, and a small revolver hung on his hip. A child's hope dressed as a man's tool. He didn't touch it. Not yet. May Delancey watched him with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many come and too few go without damage. She offered no smile, only the comfort of routine. A clean glass, a quiet question. "Whiskey?" she asked, as she did with all strangers. The boy nodded too quickly. The drink she poured was light, more water than fire, though she didn't tell him that. He coughed anyway, tried to hide it, failed. His cheeks flushed, and he wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve, like a boy caught stealing jam. She said nothing. Neither did the 3 other men seated at scattered tables. They watched with that lazy tension native to the frontier, not hostile, just alert. Like cats too tired to pounce, but not tired enough to stop staring. The boy settled on a stool, near the door, back straight, elbows awkward. He tried not to fidget, but his fingers tapped against the wood, betraying nerves he hadn't trained yet. From the fireplace, cold and still since dawn, the absence of Cole Ashburn weighed heavier than his presence might have. The boy didn't know it, but had Cole been there, he would have noticed something in the boy's gait, the tremor of someone who had never fired a shot in anger, but might someday try. May moved with the slow grace of dusk, wiping down a counter that didn't need wiping. She didn't speak again, not yet. She knew better than to force a story from someone who hadn't yet decided how to tell it. But the boy wanted to talk. He sipped his drink again, less coughing this time, and cleared his throat as if preparing for a sermon. "Name's Eli," he said, too loud for the quiet room. May glanced up. No one else responded. "I come from Garrison Hill," he added. "North of the Santero Pass. Rode 5 days to get here. Still, No response. The saloon was a place of whispers, not declarations. Eli shifted, face twitching with embarrassment, but he continued anyway, as if compelled by the weight of silence pressing back on him. Heard there was work down here. Heard the mines are still open. May met his eyes. They're not. He blinked. Oh. A beat passed. I'm good with horses. Real good. Worked at a stable since I was 9. Ain't afraid of hard labor neither. May didn't answer. She poured him another half-glass, set it before him without comment. Eli's shoulders sagged slightly. The weight of the journey, the expectation, the way the dust had settled wrong on his dreams. It all showed in that one gesture. A wind whispered through the cracks in the wall. Outside, a wagon creaked by, followed by the distant bray of a stubborn mule. The world continued, indifferent. Finally, from the corner of the saloon, one of the older men spoke. His voice was dry, worn, like saddle leather. "You looking to die young, boy?" Eli flinched. He turned, startled, unsure whether to answer or reach for the revolver he didn't yet know how to use. May's voice cut through the tension. Calm, flat. "Hush, Bill, he's just new." The old man grunted, but said nothing more. Eli turned, back to his drink, heart thudding visibly beneath his vest. "I ain't looking to die," he mumbled. "Just want to start fresh." May nodded, almost imperceptibly. Fresh costs more than coin round here. He looked at her, confusion tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Ma'am." She leaned on the counter, her face carved with the patience of a woman who had seen 100 Elis before him. "This town eats fresh. You want to stay, you'll have to go stale first." Eli didn't understand, but he didn't press. Instead, he asked, "That chair by the fire, someone sit there regular?" May wiped a glass dry. "Sometimes." "Who?" She paused. "Nobody you should bother." Eli studied the empty chair. There was something about it. The way the cushions sagged, the way the light pooled around it without warming it. It held a presence, the kind that filled the air even when the room was empty. He thought better than to ask again. Outside, the sun had begun to claw its way through the haze. Light slanted through the saloon's windows, catching particles of dust and smoke in a golden web. The air felt thicker now, heavier, as though history pressed against the walls like breath on glass. Eli didn't know it yet, but he had entered, not just a town, but a story, one older than him, older than Bitterweed Hollow, and every story here had a price. His boots would not stay clean long. Evening fell like ash. Not sudden, not loud, but with the quiet inevitability of time, folding its hands and whispering prayers. Bitterweed Hollow grew dim before it ever grew dark, as though the sun itself feared to linger long over such a weary town. Inside the dust lantern saloon, the world transformed. May lit the lanterns with the same deliberate grace she had used every evening for nearly a decade. There were 12 in all, brass-framed with cloudy glass and wicks that crackled, like kindling memories. Each one bore the soot of 100 nights and the thumbprints of patrons long since gone. She started with the corner lantern, then moved clockwise, always the same order. Ritual more than necessity. The saloon didn't truly need that many lights. Not anymore. But she lit them all anyway. For the ghosts, for the promises, for the rhythm that tethered her to the now. As she passed Eli, she noticed he watched her. Not with the wide-eyed wonder of a child, but the quiet hunger of someone trying to understand how the world worked beneath the surface. She said nothing. Neither did he. The boy had stayed longer than most. By then, a few more patrons had drifted in, a pair of ranch hands from the southern ridge, a woman in a faded blue shawl who smelled faintly of sage, and the preacher with the crooked teeth, who never drank but always sat in the same seat near the window. He watched the road instead of the bar, as though waiting for a sign from heaven or hell. At the far end of the room stood the upright piano, its wood dulled by time, its keys worn thin by years of whiskey-fueled serenades. No one played it during the day. That was the law of the place. Music, like morning, belonged to the night. Tonight, May played. It didn't happen often. Only when the silence was too loud or the walls too heavy. She sat down on the creaking stool, adjusted the hem of her skirt, and ran one finger across the keys, a whisper of ivory and age. The first notes came soft, a lullaby perhaps, or something close to it. Not a melody known by name, but something older, a tune that had no beginning and would never find an end. It rose like mist from the keys, curling in the corners of the room, settling in the bones of every listener. Eli froze, glass halfway to his lips. The woman in the blue shawl closed her eyes. Even the preacher turned slightly, as if the sound had nudged something buried deep beneath his collar. May's fingers moved slow. Sure, she did not play for applause. She did not play to entertain. She played because the lanterns burned better when there was music in the air. Outside, the wind sighed against the windows. Inside, the dust lantern exhaled, a long, shared breath of memory and meaning. Eli leaned forward. "What song is that?" May didn't stop playing. Her eyes remained distant, focused on a place beyond the keys. "It don't have a name," she murmured. "It just comes." "It's sad," he said, though the word felt too small. She nodded. "Most things worth remembering are." The boy sat back, humbled by something he could not name. There was a weight to the notes, as though each one had been soaked in a story too painful to tell aloud. He imagined May as a younger woman, somewhere far from here, playing the same tune for someone who would never hear it again. Or maybe she was playing for herself. When the final note faded, the silence it left behind felt almost sacred. No one clapped. No one spoke. The preacher turned his face back to the window. The woman in the shawl dabbed at her eye with the hem of her sleeve. The ranch hands looked down at their drinks, unsure whether to toast or pray. Eli cleared his throat. "You play like you're remembering something." May gave him a long look. "I am." He didn't ask what. He knew better now. Instead, he glanced around. "Why is it called the dust lantern?" May stood, smoothing her apron. She walked over to the lantern above the fireplace, the largest of the 12. Its glass was darker than the rest, almost black from years of burning. "That one," she said, pointing to it. "It was Rook Garvey's, first man who owned this place. He used to say it lit the way out of hell." Eli tilted his head. "And did it?" She smiled faintly. Not for him. The piano stood quiet now, its voice spent. And with it, the room returned to its usual hum, low talk, slow drinks, the soft shuffling of boots on warped wood. But something lingered. Music, once played, does not leave a room untouched. That night, as the lanterns burned low and the moon crept silver across the dusty streets, the saloon held its breath a little longer, the kind of stillness that invited dreams or nightmares. Eli didn't leave. He found a corner booth, leaned back against the wall, and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep, not yet, but he let the silence of the place carry him part way. There, above him, the lantern flickered. Below him, the floor remembered 1,000 footsteps, and somewhere between melody and memory, the dust lantern saloon whispered him welcome. Every night, just before twilight claimed the bones of Bitterweed Hollow, the preacher took his seat. He didn't knock the dust from his coat, didn't nod or tip his hat. He simply walked through the swinging doors of the dust lantern saloon, as if he were entering a chapel long forsaken by God, and took his place at the same table by the eastern window, the one with the fractured glass pane that filtered the sunset like a stained glass wound. He never ordered a drink, never spoke, unless spoken to. His teeth were crooked, not just from age but from time and violence. One was chipped in the front, jagged like a half-heard prayer. His beard was short, more stubble than style, and his coat bore the faded imprint of a cross stitched once on the back. It had since worn away, threadbare from years on horseback, and too many nights beneath the stars. No one knew his real name. He never offered it. They called him the Hollow Preacher, not because he preached much. He didn't. But because something inside him rang empty, like a bell that had forgotten its own sound. He watched the road. Always the road. Some said he waited for someone, a son maybe, a wife, a whole congregation swallowed by fire. Others claimed he'd once burned down a church in Kansas during a sermon gone wrong, that he had screamed scripture as the flames licked the pews, daring God to intervene. He never confirmed it. Never denied it either. The Hollow Preacher didn't flinch at gunfire. He didn't blink when men argued or when chairs overturned. He didn't bow his head during prayers muttered by dying drunks. He just sat, spine straight, hands clasped on the table like he was forever in the middle of a silent sermon. May had asked him once, just once, why he came. His answer was short, because sinners gather. She hadn't asked again. Every so often, late at night, he would hum. Not a tune anyone could name, just a low vibration of breath and bone, like a hymn half remembered from a childhood church buried deep beneath shame. He wore a silver ring, plain save for a single inscription on the inside that no one had ever seen. He touched it sometimes, absently, as though it tethered him to something that had once mattered. Eli had noticed him the second night. The boy had tried to meet his gaze, curious and unafraid, but found only reflection, like staring into a well too deep to measure. Something in the preacher's stillness unsettled him. There was no threat in the man's presence, only an absence that felt too complete. Like a tree hollowed by lightning, still standing, but long since dead inside. The preacher watched the boy for a moment, then turned back to the window. Nothing more. But Eli couldn't help asking May, when the room had emptied, save for the hiss of the fire and the tick of the wall clock, "Who is he?" May didn't answer immediately. She finished drying a glass, placed it gently back on the shelf, and looked over her shoulder toward the window. "That man's walked longer through darkness than most men live in light," she said finally. Eli frowned. "But he doesn't do anything." "No," she agreed. "That's what makes him dangerous." The next evening, the preacher came again. Same table, same silence. But this time, something in his eyes had shifted. A tension, a glint of memory, like the glimmer of a knife in low light. He turned slowly toward the bar, and for the first time in years, he spoke to May unprompted. Did he come back yet? May didn't need to ask who. "Not yet," she said. The preacher's fingers drummed once against the table. "He will." Eli heard this exchange. He leaned closer to May after the preacher turned back to the window. "Who's he waiting for?" May shook her head. "That's between him and his God." But the truth, the deep, unspoken truth, was that Bitterweed Hollow had once nearly been the site of a duel. Not between drunkards or outlaws, but between two men who carried scripture, like gunpowder. Years back, a man had come through town, wearing the same collar the Hollow Preacher now tucked into his coat. A revivalist, loud, proud, wild-eyed, shouting about sin and salvation, dragging behind him a band of mourners, and a wagon of Bibles. The Hollow Preacher had stood in the middle of Main Street and met him with silence. They exchanged no bullets, only verses. And whatever was said that day split something in both men. The revivalist left. The Hollow Preacher stayed. It was said that he gave up the pulpit that day, that his faith died not in the fire, but in the echo of Scripture twisted into challenge. Since then, he had waited, not for vengeance, not for peace, but perhaps just for a reason. The dust lantern gave him a seat. May gave him space, and the lanterns burned on, night after night, casting light on a man who had nothing left to say, but perhaps one day would. Late one evening, when the lanterns burned low and the piano keys still held the faint heat of May's last melody, the doors to the dust lantern creaked open and a man stepped through with the silence of a well-dressed ghost. He wore black gloves, not leathered from ranching or riding, but soft, like something a funeral man might wear. His coat, a charcoal duster, swept in behind him with the grace of something theatrical. His boots were polished, not unlike Eli's had once been, though these bore the wear of stage floors and backroom card tables. But it was his eye, or rather the absence of one, that quieted the room. Where a right eye should have been was a gleaming sphere of glass, perfectly smooth and milk-white, like a pearl made uneasy. It caught the light and scattered it strangely, as though it could see things that human eyes could not. The left eye, sharp and green as a poker table under lamplight, did all the speaking. May stiffened only slightly when she saw him. He tipped, his hat to her. "Evening, Mr. Lancy." His voice was velvet-soaked in bourbon. Charming, practiced, dangerous. "Back again, Marlin?" she said, setting down her cloth. Marlin Gray. The name hung like smoke. The last time he'd passed through Bitterweed Hollow, 3 men had walked away poorer than they'd come, and 1 had never walked again. He wasn't a gunman. Not exactly, though he carried a derringer up his sleeve and a switchblade in his boot. No, Marlin's weapons were more subtle. Luck. Deception. A laugh at just the wrong moment. He moved to the center table like he owned it, set his small leather case down, and opened it with a flourish. Cards, stiff, slick, red-backed, spilled onto the wood like secrets. Dice followed. Weighted, no doubt, and a stack of silver tokens engraved with symbols from towns that no longer existed. Eli watched him with the quiet awe of someone seeing something beautiful and wrong at the same time. Marlin caught his gaze. "Well, now," he purred. "I don't believe we've met." The boy flushed. "Eli. Eli." Marlin repeated the name like a coin he was testing for weight. "You play, son?" Eli hesitated. "A little." "Then tonight's your lucky education." Marlin grinned, setting up the cards with a flick of his wrist that sent them into perfect arcs across the table. May said nothing. She returned to the bar, but didn't turn her back. The hollow preacher shifted in his chair. Slowly, as if some part of him recognized the scent of a soul like Marlin's, the kind that wore civility, like skin over bone. 2 ranch hands wandered over to the table, and soon a game began. Soft-spoken, deceptively friendly. Marlin dealt with the confidence of a magician and the timing of a man who'd once stolen both a purse and a heart in the same breath. Eli played, poorly at first, then better. Marlin let him win, once, then twice. The boy's cheeks lit up. His confidence bloomed, slow and eager. That was the danger. May poured herself a drink, rare for her, and watched from the bar, not because she feared cheating. No one ever caught Marlin cheating. It wasn't his hands that were crooked. It was his luck, the kind of luck that bent around others and snapped them in half. After an hour, 1 ranch hand bowed out, muttering, "About cursed dice." The other stayed, eyes narrowing, and then Eli bet something more than coin. "I'll put up my watch," he said, heart thudding. Marlin leaned in, all teeth and amusement. "Time, Well, time's a valuable thing. But sure, let's see what fate has to say." The hand was close. Too close. And Marlin won. Of course, he did. He always did. Eli swallowed his loss, but the pain was visible in the way his shoulders dropped. That watch had meant something. Maybe a gift. Maybe the last piece of a father long gone. Marlin took it gently, examined the chain, then pocketed it without flourish. "Fine taste," he said softly. The game dissolved soon after. Players wandered, off. Eli sat quietly, his hands empty. Marlin gathered his cards, placed them neatly in the case, and stood. He glanced toward the fireplace, still cold, then turned to May. "I'll be staying a few days," he said, assuming the Hollow hasn't changed her rules. May nodded once. "Room upstairs, end of the hall, keys still hanging." He tipped his hat again. As ever, a gracious host. Then he left the main room, boots clicking against wood that remembered him. Eli lingered. May finally spoke. "He teach you anything?" Eli nodded slowly. "Don't gamble with what you can't lose." She gave a faint smile. "Lesson most men learn too late." The lanterns swayed in a wind that hadn't touched them, and outside the road grew darker. It had seen its share of high-stakes hands and cheap bluffs. It had soaked up more spilled whiskey than any floorboard ever could, and its scars, nicks, cigarette burns, a small bloodstain in the shape of a thumbprint, were memory etched into wood. The chairs around it creaked like old men with secrets, and the lamp above threw a circle of amber light that held the night at bay. But that evening, no cards were dealt, no chips clacked, no coins changed hands. Instead, there were 4 chairs pulled close, and in them sat 4 souls who had no reason to trust each other, and every reason not to. Cole Ashburn sat with his hat in his lap, gunbelt loose, one finger idly circling the rim of a whiskey glass. The Hollow Preacher was across from him, hands steepled, eyes like 2 lanterns dimmed but still burning. Marlin Gray leaned back, boots crossed at the ankle, his coat open just enough to show the glint of a knife. And May, steady May, was standing drying a glass, though she hadn't poured a drink in half an hour. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and something else, expectation. It was Marlin who spoke first. "Well," he said slowly, "I figure we ought to stop pretending something ain't coming." Cole didn't look up. "You talk like a man with information." "I talk like a man with ears," Marlin replied. "And ears have been picking up a sound like trouble." May placed the glass down. "What kind of trouble?" she asked. Marlin shrugged. "The kind that rides quiet, don't kick up much dust. The kind that only makes itself known when it's too close to stop." The Hollow Preacher leaned in slightly. "You mean Cobb?" "No," said Marlin. "I mean worse." That silenced them. Cole finally looked up. "What do you know, Marlin?" Marlin looked around the table, measuring faces. "There's talk of a lawman coming west who don't wear a badge. Clean coat, sharp boots, papers signed by ghosts. He ain't chasing justice. He's chasing stories, and he's got a list." May narrowed her eyes. "What kind of list?" "The kind with names scratched out," said Marlin. "And not all of 'em dead yet." Cole exhaled through his nose. "So what's he want with this town?" Marlin leaned forward now, his tone grave. "He wants what Bitterweed Hollow hides best. Memory. People. What they used to be before they washed up here." May folded her arms. "And you think that matters?" "I think it matters more than it ever did," he said. "Because for some folks, the past is a price someone else pays." The Hollow Preacher nodded slowly. "I've buried men who thought that way." Cole's hand curled slightly around the rim of his glass. "So what now?" No one answered. Not right away. Then May moved to the table. She pulled out a chair, sat down, and folded her hands. "We don't owe each other a thing," she said. "Not a one of us. But I'd rather face what's coming together than alone." Marlin raised a brow. "You asking for a pact?" "I'm offering one." The room fell silent again. It was Cole who broke it. "I've ridden with pacts before," he said. "Most of them ended with bullets in backs." May met his eyes. "Then let this one end with us standing. Or not at all." Cole considered that, then nodded once. Marlin smirked. "Hell, why not? Safer to die in a circle than run in a line." He reached into his coat and pulled a single silver dollar. It was worn smooth on one side. He placed it at the center of the table. The Hollow Preacher followed suit. From his pocket, he drew a strip of cloth, soft, stained, and folded carefully. He laid it down beside the coin. "From the shirt I wore, the day I stopped preaching," he said, "what I carry to remind myself that silence can be sacred." May didn't hesitate. She slipped a ring from her right hand. A small thing, plain brass, once gold perhaps. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. Cole looked down at his hand, then at the guns on his belt, quiet and quicker. He didn't remove them. Instead, he pulled from his breast pocket a yellowed playing card, the Queen of Spades. A corner was torn. A smear of something, dried blood or spilled wine, stained the edge. He laid it gently atop the others. No one touched anything. No vows were spoken. But they all knew what had just happened, an oath made not in blood, but in memory. An agreement shaped not by law or coin, but by the thin thread that sometimes joins the broken, loyalty born of loss. They sat a while longer, then one by one, they stood. May left the items on the table. She'd clear them in the morning, or not. Cole was the last to leave. Before he turned to go, he looked back at the table. The silver coin, the strip of cloth, the brass ring, the torn card. They didn't shine, but they held weight. And sometimes, that's all a promise needs. May had tried once to forget the knife, but it never really left. That morning, the air hung heavy, even though the sky was clear. The saloon smelled of oil, floor soap, and the sour tang of old beer that refused to die. The dust lantern was still half asleep, and Eli had taken it upon himself to sweep beneath the furniture, as he did when his thoughts were too loud. The piano stood in its usual place near the corner, tilted slightly out of square with the wall, always just a little off. It hadn't been played in weeks, maybe longer. Its keys, once polished and beloved, had dulled like the eyes of a dog grown too old to run. Eli moved to sweep beneath it. He crouched, awkward with the broom, and nudged it just enough to see behind. And there, lying in the shadows between the legs and the wall, was a knife. He didn't shout. He reached out, slow and sure, as if disturbing it too fast might wake whatever memory had lain dormant with it. The blade was short, 5 inches, maybe 6, curved at the tip, like it had been sharpened by habit, not skill. The handle was leather-wrapped, or had been, though most of it had worn away. A thick brown stain crept from the base of the blade toward the hilt. Eli's fingers brushed the steel, cold. He picked it up and stood. His voice didn't rise above a whisper. "May!" She looked up from the bar, polishing glassware, not expecting trouble. But when she saw the knife in his hand, she stopped. Her fingers froze. The cloth dropped to the counter, and her face changed. She walked toward him slowly, never taking her eyes from the blade. "Where did you find it?" she asked. "Behind the piano." She reached out, took it from him with a carefulness that spoke of something deeper than fear. Reverence, perhaps, or dread. She turned the knife over in her hands. It was not a stranger. "It's still here," she murmured. Not to Eli, not even to herself, but to something long buried. Cole Ashburn had been coming down the stairs just then, steps light as ever. He saw May with the knife and stopped mid-step. Then quietly, "That it?" May didn't look at him. "It's it." Eli looked between them. "Whose is it?" Cole stepped down the rest of the stairs and came close. "Rook Garvey's," he said. The name, even now, stirred something in the room, like a match scratched in a cellar. Eli frowned. "The Rook?" "But he left," May finished. "But not before that night." "What night?" Silence. The hollow preacher stirred near the window. His voice, though faint, was clear. "The night the piano stopped being music." May set the knife down on the bar gently, as if it might still break skin from memory alone. "It happened late," she said. 3 years ago, maybe 4. A stranger came in, not looking for a drink, not looking for rest, just looking for Rook. "What did he want?" Eli asked. May looked him full in the face then, calm, honest, and heavy. He wanted to finish a blood debt, Cole added, and he came armed. Eli's eyes widened. But the rook moved first, May continued. It wasn't loud. No yelling, no gunfire, just movement. Then silence, then blood. She turned toward the piano. I cleaned most of it, but not all. Eli swallowed. What happened to the man? May looked at the knife again. No name, no story, no burial. Just a hole in the ground west of the chapel, and a tune that no one played again. The hollow preacher nodded solemnly. Some songs don't deserve resurrection. Eli stared at the knife like it might speak. May took a deep breath. I thought I threw it away. You didn't, Cole said. You slid it behind the piano after we cleaned. I remember. May's gaze flicked to him. I wanted to forget. He nodded. We both did. The three of them stood around the bar, Eli young and new too, shadows, May worn by memory, and Cole somewhere between. Should we get rid of it now? Eli asked. Bury it? Burn it? No, May said simply. But why not? The boy asked. May folded her arms. Because it's part of the story now. We don't honor it. We don't fear it. We just remember it, Cole added. Forgetting is what makes ghosts come back angry. Eli nodded slowly. May reached for a tin box beneath the bar, where she kept broken glass, lost earrings, and other things too sharp to toss thoughtlessly. She placed the knife inside, closed it, and slid it onto the shelf. Visible, present, but caged. She returned to the bar and resumed polishing her glass. Her hands, though steady, trembled faintly. That night, no one touched the piano. No music played, but something deeper stirred. Not a song, not a scream, just the knowing that even behind silence, something sharp may wait, and that some truths don't rot, they rust, like it had sagged just slightly lower, pressing down on rooftops, leaning in through cracks in the walls, weighing heavy in the lungs. This was one of those days, a day swollen with waiting. Thunderclouds piled above the valley like bruises, dark and soft-edged, yet nothing fell from them. No wind stirred the dust, no lightning cracked the horizon, only silence, the kind of silence that wasn't quiet at all, that throbbed at the edges of your ears like something was being held back. May stepped out onto the saloon porch that morning and tilted her face upward. The air smelled of distant rain and old wood. Her apron strings fluttered, not in wind, but in anticipation. Behind her, the dust lantern sat still and unsettled, as though it too could sense that something was off-kilter. Inside, Eli was polishing glasses, slowly, with care, as May had taught him. He didn't speak, not because he was tired, but because words felt too loud in that strange stillness. The kind of day where every clink of glass sounded like a misstep. The hollow preacher was already in his seat by the window. He had come early, earlier than usual. He, too, stared at the sky. You feel it? May asked softly when she returned. He nodded once. The world's holding its breath. No one argued. Even Marlin Gray was quieter than usual. He sat at the poker table with his cards untouched, sleeves rolled up to the elbow. That glass, eye-catching more shadows than light. He wasn't smiling. He'd slept little the night before. May knew. His room was directly above hers, and she'd heard his footsteps pacing for hours. Not restless, measured, like a man waiting for a knock he knew would come. What are you expecting, Marlin? May had asked when she poured him his coffee that morning. He'd met her gaze evenly. Not what, darling? Who? Now he sat with fingers steepled, watching. The saloon with the stillness of a hunter who wasn't sure who was hunting who. By midday, the light had changed. Not dimmed, but thickened, as though the sun had been pressed behind too many layers of cotton and forgotten how to shine. Travelers didn't pass through town. No wagons clattered over the old bridge. Even the horses in the stable behind the saloon were silent, their hooves muffled in straw, their eyes rolling to the clouds. Eli finally broke the silence. placing the towel down on the bar. "It feels wrong," he said. May looked up from the ledger. "What does?" "Everything," he replied. "Like, something ought to happen, but it won't. And that's worse." She didn't disagree. At 4 o'clock, a woman in a green dress entered the saloon. No one recognized her. She wasn't young. Her hair was pinned, neat. Her eyes sharp, distant. She didn't smile. She walked straight to the piano and stood there, not playing, just staring at the keys. "May I?" she asked without turning. May hesitated, then nodded. The woman sat. Her fingers hovered, then fell. The song she played was slow, spare. Just 3 notes repeated, rising, then falling. A lullaby with no cradle. A song that didn't soothe, but reminded. The hollow preacher's shoulders tensed. Marlin rose slowly from his chair. And May gripped the counter until her knuckles ached, because that song hadn't been heard in Bitterweed Hollow since the war ended, and the man who used to play it, the man who played it just once, right before he vanished into the northern hills, was Cole Ashburn. The woman played for less than a minute, then stopped, stood and left. She didn't order a drink, didn't look at anyone, just disappeared into the cloudlight outside. No one moved for a long while. Finally, Marlin spoke, his voice softer than usual. She had a Colt hidden in her petticoat. May raised an eyebrow. "And you knew that by looking?" He nodded. It was the way she sat, the way she leaned. She was ready to shoot someone. "Did you know her?" "No," Marlin said. "But I think she knew someone here." The preacher stirred. "That song don't belong to the living." No one answered. By evening, the clouds still hadn't moved. They hung there, silent, swollen, heavy with the weight of promises not kept. May lit the lanterns earlier than usual. The light helped, but not much. When Eli closed the shutters, he paused, hand lingering on the latch. "Will it storm tonight?" he asked. May watched the flicker of flame in the lantern glass. "No." "Why not?" "Because storms bring release," she said. "And today wants to remember." That night, the dust lantern stayed open later than usual, but no music played, no glasses shattered, no voices raised, just that same unbearable stillness. The thunder never came, and that somehow was worse. The dust lantern had grown used to the ache of stillness, the kind of air that wrapped itself around the ribs of the building and held its breath, the kind of stillness that made even the lanterns seem to flicker with unease. For 4 days, no one had heard from Cole Ashburn, not a footstep, not a letter, not even the echo of a question asked in his name. May hadn't said a word about it, not to Eli, not to the hollow preacher, not even to herself. But she'd set aside a cup on the bar each morning, black ceramic, chipped near the lip, the one he always used. She never filled it, but she never moved it either. And then, as dawn barely hinted on the edges of the horizon, the saloon doors eased open with a long, breathy creak. He stood there, as though no time had passed at all. Cole Ashburn, hat low, coat dusty, a silence clinging to him like smoke. No one else was awake. Just May. She didn't gasp, didn't rush forward. She simply looked up, met his eyes, and reached beneath the bar. A moment later, a full mug of hot coffee sat where the empty one had. Cole walked to it, boots quiet on the wood, and sat down without a word. He held the mug in both hands like a ritual, something remembered from another life. May finally spoke. "You missed the quiet season," he raised an eyebrow. "Didn't seem like I missed much." "You didn't miss it," she said softly. "You brought it with you." They sat in silence, the kind that belongs only to those who've known each other longer than either will admit aloud. After a moment, May asked the question, not because she wanted an answer, but because it had to be spoken. "Where'd you go?" Cole stared into his cup. "North," he said. "How far?" "Far enough to see the same stars from a different sky." She nodded. That was all she'd get, and all she needed. From the staircase behind them came the soft thud of Eli's bare feet. The boy paused when he saw Cole, eyes wide, sleep still clinging to his face. "You came back," Cole nodded once. "You kept it standing." Eli grinned. "Didn't fall, far as I saw." Cole looked toward May. "Good help," May smirked. "Don't get used to him. He'll break a glass before noon." From the corner near the shuttered window, the hollow preacher stirred. No one had seen him rise. He simply faded from rest into wakefulness, like a candle relighting itself. "You look older," he said, voice husky. Cole didn't argue. "I feel returned." "Returned is not the same as found," the preacher replied. Cole took another sip. "Don't need to be found, just need to be seen." The preacher nodded once. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. Finally, Marlin Gray pushed through the saloon doors, a coil of tobacco at his lip and a thin line of suspicion in his eyes. "Well, hell," he drawled. "Thought we'd buried you, behind the chapel and forgotten the name." "You think too much," Cole replied without looking. Marlin chuckled. "Not about you, just about which direction trouble tends to walk in from." "Then you know it doesn't walk," Cole said. "It rides." Marlin pulled up a chair at the bar, sat down beside Eli, and flicked a glance toward May. "You tell him." May poured another cup of coffee. "No need," she said. "He already smells it." Cole's gaze shifted just a touch. Not enough for a full turn of the head, but enough to let them all know. He had brought something back with him. Not an object, not a person, but a certainty. May spoke softly. "There's a weight in your coat." Cole didn't reply right away. Then, slowly, he reached into the inner pocket of his duster and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. He set it on the bar, unopened. Eli leaned forward. "What is it?" "Map," Cole said. "But not of roads, not of mountains." "What then?" Cole's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Of names." May didn't touch it. Neither did the others. Instead, Cole opened the parchment himself and spread it across the bar. There, inked with delicate care, were 15 names. Some had red lines through them, some did not. May scanned the list, eyes narrowing at one name near the bottom. She spoke it aloud. "Bran Holt." Cole nodded. "He's coming." "Here?" "No," Cole said. "But he'll hear this town's name soon, if he hasn't already." The hollow preacher crossed his arms. "And what does he do when he hears it?" Cole looked up. "He crosses it off." A hush fell like snowfall. Eli whispered, "Like the others." Cole nodded. "Like the others." May rolled the parchment back up and handed it back. "We've got time. Maybe. Then we make ready." Cole looked at each of them in turn. Eli, May, the preacher, Marlin. No one flinched. No one turned away. And for the first time since he'd walked through the doors, Cole smiled. Thin, fleeting, and real. "Then let's light the lanterns," he said, and they did, one by one, until the dust lantern glowed like a beacon again, not for travelers, not for peace, but for resistance, for memory, for the promise that whatever came, they would meet it together. The floorboards creaked, not from age, but memory. Each groan, each soft thud of boot heel, echoed with the footsteps of all those who had walked those halls before, drunk, desperate, or lost in love they couldn't name. Cole Ashburn's room was the last on the left. It had no number on the door, just a dull brass knob, slightly bent, as though someone once tried to force their way in or out, and failed. He unlocked it with a key he hadn't used in months. It slid in smoothly, turned with a soft click, and the door opened with the sigh of old hinges. The room smelled faintly of pine, oil, and long-dried sweat. Not unpleasant, just lived in. The window was half open, curtains still drawn tight. A low cot rested against the far wall, made, surprisingly, with the kind of care that only a man used to motion finds necessary in stillness. Beside it, a small table bore a single candle, a matchbox, and a worn leather-bound book whose pages had never been dog-eared. Cole stepped inside and shut the door behind him. He took off his coat first, folded it carefully, placed it on the wooden chair by the wall, next the gun belt. He unbuckled it with practiced ease, as if undressing a memory rather than a tool. The weight of the revolvers shifted in his hands like sleeping animals. He laid the belt across the table with reverence, positioning it so the handles pointed inward. A gesture of vulnerability, or perhaps just habit. Then he sat on the edge of the cot. He didn't remove his boots, didn't lay back. He just sat, elbows on knees, staring at the floor with that blank expression he wore when the past whispered too close. The revolvers were old friends, not in the romantic way storytellers frame such things, but in the bitter way soldiers speak of brothers in arms. Each one had its own name, etched faintly on the inner grip, where no eye could see unless it already knew to look. One read, "Quiet," the other, "Quicker." He hadn't fired either in weeks, but they had memory, and it was always close. Cole leaned back, slowly, and drew the candle closer. He struck a match, lit the wick, and let the tiny flame dance in the stillness. Shadows stretched along the walls like fingers reaching through time. He opened the book. Inside were names, just names. No dates, no places, just first names. Dozens. Some faded, written so lightly they were almost gone. Others etched in dark strokes, fresh and unforgiving. He stared at the last name, Jonas. His hand hovered over it, as if expecting the page to warm from touch. Then he closed the book and placed it back down. He rose and walked to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see the town. From up here, Bitterweed Hollow looked almost peaceful. Almost. The sun was setting, caught in the curve of the hills, bleeding, amber across rooftops. He saw the preacher cross the road to the little chapel that hadn't rung its bell in 5 years. Saw Eli sitting on the front porch of the saloon, hat tipped back, mouth chewing on thought. He did not see May, but he felt her. Below him, in the bar, she would be pouring drinks, cleaning glasses, pausing sometimes to stare into the middle distance, where nothing lived. She always knew when he returned, and she always pretended not to care until he broke the silence first. Cole closed the curtain and turned away. He walked to the mirror, a small one, cracked at the edge, and looked at his reflection like it belonged to someone else. The scar at his jaw still ran pale against his skin. The grey at his temples had deepened since the last time he looked close. He picked up a cloth, dampened it in the basin, and wiped the dust from his face. A ritual, like laying down arms, like forgiving yourself for surviving. The room was quiet, but not empty. He reached under the cot and pulled out a box, long, narrow, wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a third revolver, heavier, older. Its barrel bore an inscription in Latin, barely legible now. Fiat Justitia, Ruat Caelum. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. He hadn't carried it in years. Not since the day a marshal from New Mexico had handed him a paper with his name on it and said, "You're legal now, but that don't make you innocent." He had kept it anyway. Cole held the revolver a moment, feeling its weight, then placed it back in the box, rewrapped it, and pushed it once again beneath the cot. Where guns sleep, where regrets are stored, where justice, such as it ever was, waits, patiently to be remembered. He lay down then, not to rest, but to listen. The sounds of the saloon drifted up faintly, voices, laughter, the shuffling of cards. He closed his eyes, not in peace, but in readiness. Because tomorrow, or the day after, or maybe the one after that, someone would come looking for a name on that list. And when they did, quiet and quicker would wake. It wasn't written on the walls, nor posted by decree, but it was understood, by drinkers, drifters, and decent folk alike, that the dust lantern closed when the 12th bell of the invisible church rang inside May's mind. Some nights, she did it early, but she never did it late. Until that night. The day had been long in a strange, quiet way. The clouds never moved. The poker games were dull, and even Marlin had retreated upstairs early, saying something vague about needing to consult with silence. The hollow preacher hadn't appeared at all. Eli had cleaned everything twice, polished the mirror, and disappeared. To the back room, with a lantern and a book of dime novel cowboy tales that May pretended not to know he hid behind the supply shelf. By the time the last drinker left, the wind had changed direction, just slightly. May stood behind the bar, alone, with the candlelight low and flickering in a way that made everything seem older than it should be. She stared at the front door, the warped wood with its iron handle and brass bolt, the frame still carved faintly with initials she hadn't traced in years. She should have turned the lock. Her hand reached for it, but it didn't turn. She let it rest there for a moment, then stepped away. She didn't know why. Perhaps because Cole was back. Perhaps because something was in the air, coiling unseen around her ribs. Perhaps because, though she'd never admit it, she was tired of being the one who always closed things. So she left the bolt untouched, and the door stood shut, but not sealed. She went upstairs, her own room, across from Cole's, and sat on the edge of the bed with her boots still on. A bottle of rye sat unopened beside her, a gift once given by a man who swore he'd return from the desert. He never did. She didn't drink it. She just watched it, and waited for sleep that did not come. Downstairs, the saloon remained still. The chairs were tucked in, the glasses clean, the piano untouched. And then the door opened, not with force, not even with hesitation. It simply swung inward, slowly, with the soft complaint of old hinges remembering their purpose. A figure stepped in, neither hurried nor cautious. Cloaked, but not for disguise. The air shifted. Their boots were small, soft. They walked with grace, not swagger, not drunk, not armed. A woman. She crossed the saloon like she knew it, moved past the bar, past the chairs, past the dark piano. Her fingers brushed a table edge, just barely. Like a blind woman reacquainting herself with a home long absent, and then she stopped at the fireplace, where Cole's chair sat empty, where the cushion still bore his shape. She sat down in it, as though it belonged to her. Upstairs, May felt the change. Not a sound, not a creak, just the certainty that someone was now inside the place she had left too open. She rose, calm, and descended the stairs with slow steps. The woman did not turn. May walked behind the bar. Silence stretched between them. The lantern flickered. Finally, the stranger spoke. Her voice was quiet. Young, but aged at the edges, like paper that's been folded too many times. You left the door open. May nodded, though the woman could not see it. Not by accident. You knew I was coming? May tilted her head. No, but I knew someone would. The woman turned slightly, just enough for May to see the edge of her face. Pale, tired, eyes that held rivers, a streak of ash across her cheek. May didn't ask her name, didn't need to. The woman said, "He left something with you." May didn't pretend not to know who he was. She reached beneath the bar and pulled out a small tin, round, rusted at the edges, sealed with a thin strip of cloth knotted 3 times. She placed it on the counter. The woman stood slowly, crossed the floor without sound, took the tin in both hands and held it to her chest. May asked, "You gonna open it?" The woman shook her head. "Not yet." They stood there a moment. Then, before May could stop her, The woman turned and walked to the piano. She sat down and played. It was not the same song from before, not the lullaby, not the 3 notes Cole had once played beneath moons too red to speak of. This was different. A dirge, but soft, gentle, forgiving. It echoed through the saloon like candlelight through a church window. May did not cry, but something inside her loosened, like a seam she'd forgotten was stitched too tight. When the song ended, the woman stood. She said only one more thing. Tell him she forgives him. Then she left, without sound, without the tin. May watched the door close behind her. Only then did she step forward. She picked up the tin and held it in both hands. It felt warm. Upstairs, Cole Ashburn sat on the edge of his bed, eyes wide, hands trembling. He had heard the song, and he knew what it meant, but he did not move. Because some doors, once left open, are harder to close than they appear. Not a shout, not a gallop, not the kind of arrival one could mistake for a visitor, or a travelling preacher, or a lost merchant. Just a shape, a figure on horseback, still as a statue, silhouetted against the morning sun as it crept above the northern hills of Bitterweed Hollow. It was Eli who noticed first. He'd stepped out the back door of the dust lantern before sunrise, drawn by a vague unease in his sleep. A sense of something unspoken and unfinished. He stretched, rubbed the grit from his eyes, and looked to the hills out of habit, not intention. And there he saw it. The rider, high, solitary, unmoving, horse pale, almost spectral in the growing light. Rider hunched forward slightly, but erect, enough to see. Hat brim low, shoulders broad. No banner, no sign, no threat made. And yet, Eli stepped backward through the saloon doors without turning his back to the ridge. He stood in the empty hush of the lantern, listening to the woods settle. Around him, he didn't call for May immediately. He didn't need to. She was already awake. She emerged from the cellar with a sack of potatoes in her arms, stopped halfway across the floor when she saw the look on his face. Up north, Eli said. Ridgeline, someone's watching us. May didn't speak. She set the sack down, walked to the doors, and stepped outside. The air was brisk, still touched with the final chill of winter's breath. Her eyes scanned the horizon, and there, sharp and dark against the amber sky, stood the silhouette, a man and a horse, unmoving, May's jaw set. She returned inside. Wake Cole, she said. Now. By the time Cole Ashburn came down the stairs, rifle in hand but not yet cocked, the rider had not budged. Cole stepped outside and stood beside May. He watched for a long moment, saying nothing. Then, softly, "He's not here for the view." "No," May said. "He been there long?" "Since Eli stepped out." "You reckon he'll ride in?" "I reckon if he meant to, he already would have." Cole nodded. "Then he's waiting." "For what?" "Don't know. That's the part I don't like." Inside, the hollow preacher stirred from his seat in the far corner, seemingly awake before he opened his eyes. "There's someone on the ridge," he said aloud, as though reading scripture. "There's someone watching who's been watched before." By mid-morning, the town knew. Word in Bitterweed Hollow travelled fast, especially when no one wanted to speak it aloud. People paused in doorways, shaded their eyes, and whispered to each other in tones too low to carry. No one approached the ridge. No one left town. The general store stayed open, but no bell rang. Even the church kept its doors closed. By noon, the man on the ridge still hadn't moved. The sun passed overhead. The light shifted. Shadows shortened, and, still, he sat. A quiet kind of dread began to root in the floorboards of the dust lantern. Not panic, not fear, but that heavy tension that settles in the lungs when something ancient and slow begins to draw near. Inside the saloon, Eli sat with his hands folded, staring into nothing. Marlin Gray entered just after 2, saw the tension hanging in the air, and said, "I see our guests still perched." Cole didn't answer, just nodded toward the ridge. Marlin walked to the door, looked out and whistled low. "Not a scout," he said. "Too brazen." "Not a preacher," May added. "Too still." "Not a bounty hunter." "Too quiet." "Not a lost soul." "Too early." Marlin turned. "Then what the hell is he?" Cole stood slowly. "Reminder," he said. The hollow preacher lifted his cup and murmured, "That not all judgment comes on foot." Afternoon passed. Shadows lengthened. The rider did not drink, did not move, did not signal. He simply remained. A distant truth made visible. The piano in the dust lantern stayed closed. No cards were dealt, no whiskey flowed. Conversation dropped to murmurs and glances. No one said the man's name because no one knew it, but everyone remembered someone like him, a cousin who vanished, a brother who rode off in the night, a lawman who never returned, a story that ended in silence, and the ridge, once a mere horizon, now watched back. At dusk, as the sky turned copper and clouds rolled low, May finally spoke. "If he stays, another night, he's not just passing." Cole nodded. "If he stays," he said, "we send someone up." "No," said the hollow preacher. They looked at him. "We wait," he said. "Let the mountains speak first." Cole met May's eyes. She didn't answer with words, but her gaze held agreement. And something else. Grief. Not the grief of mourning, but the grief of knowing a page is about to turn, and you cannot stop the hand that writes. By nightfall, the rider was still there, and Bitterweed Hollow slept as best it could, under the eye of a stranger who never blinked. As it shifted across his shoulder, the barrel glinted, just once, like a lightning flash without the storm. It was sundown, and Bitterweed Hollow stretched long in the shadow of the ridge, every window and doorway facing west, as though the whole town had turned to witness what the evening might bring. Inside the dust lantern, lamps flickered and hushed. Talk circled the bar. No piano tonight. No cards. Even Marlin Gray had folded his deck and vanished upstairs. Eli stood behind, the counter, drying glasses he'd already cleaned. His hands moved automatically, but his eyes kept drifting to the window. May didn't speak. She stood near the back wall, arms folded, eyes narrowed, as if watching something far beyond what the rest could see. She hadn't tied her apron that evening, a rare sign. Her hair hung looser, her shoulders stiffer. The hollow preacher sat in his usual place, though his Bible was closed now. His hands were clasped, not in prayer, but in readiness. On the floor beneath his chair lay a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. No one asked what it was. Cole had yet to come down. They all knew he would, eventually, because the man on the ridge wasn't watching the town. He was watching Cole Ashburn. The townsfolk had taken notice early in the day, and by sundown, the streets were deserted, curtains drawn, lanterns dimmed. The blacksmith locked his doors with more than just a latch. Mothers pulled their children in by the shoulders. No lawman rode out. There was no law in Bitterweed Hollow, but memory, and the man on the ridge was a reminder made flesh. May finally broke the silence. "His name's Ransom Cobb." The others turned. Eli paused mid-polish. "Ransom," he echoed, unfamiliar. The preacher did not lift his head, but murmured, "I thought him dead." May nodded slowly. He was, in every way that counted, until now. Eli frowned. "Who is he?" May didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved behind the bar and opened a locked drawer she hadn't touched in over 4 years. From it, she pulled a faded newspaper clipping, yellowed, brittle. She unfolded it carefully and placed it on the bar. The headline read, "Deputy Marshal Ransom Cobb missing after Ashburn shootout." Beneath the bold letters, a grainy sketch, 2 men facing each other in the dust, hands low at their belts. One bore Cole's likeness. The other was younger than the man on the ridge, but the jawline, the eyes, the rifle, all unmistakable. "Shot him in the leg," May said, and then disappeared. Nobody ever found the body. Eli looked up, stunned. Cole shot a lawman. The preacher lifted his eyes then. Not just a lawman who crossed the line. May nodded once. Cobb was known for carrying warrants he didn't have the right to serve. He hunted men already punished and punished them twice. But Cole, Eli began. Refused to die quiet, May finished. Outside, the last sliver of sun kissed the ridge. The rifle glinted again. The preacher spoke, voice low. He's not here for the law, not anymore. May turned her gaze to the stairs, still, empty. I know, she whispered. Then came the knock. Not at the saloon door, no, not yet, but from above. Cole, stepping down the staircase one step at a time. Not in hurry, not in fear, but in resolution. His coat was freshly brushed, though the hem still bore trail dust. His shirt was buttoned all the way up, and his hat rested in his hand, a sign of respect. On each hip, Quiet and Quicker waited, already familiar with the weight of regret. May met him at the bottom. He's not come for a drink. I didn't. Bring money, Cole replied softly. She looked into his eyes, and what she saw there was not panic, but weariness. Don't do it, she said. He nodded. Then he'll come down anyway, and someone else will bleed in my place. You owe him? Cole turned his gaze toward the door. I owe too many, he said. Then he reached into his coat and pulled something out, a folded piece of cloth, wrapped around a small silver token. For you, he said. May looked at the bundle, then back at him. What is it? My apology, in case I don't get to say it later. She didn't take it. Not yet. She just nodded. And that, between them, was enough. Cole stepped out into the street as the sun finally vanished. The light faded fast. The man on the ridge did not move, but the rifle rose, slowly, carefully, and leveled toward the saloon's main road. The air held no wind, no sound, just breath, drawn tight across Bitterweed Hollow, and somewhere far above, the first star blinked. Awake. It didn't sit on any rail lines, no gold in the soil, no oil beneath. Just a few dozen buildings clustered together like survivors around a fire. And maybe that's exactly what they were, survivors. But if you stayed long enough, if you listened, you'd learn something else. Bitterweed Hollow remembered. It didn't forget its failures, didn't paint over its scars. It didn't push old graves into new soil or rename its dead to fit a better story. This was a town that didn't look away, and that, more than anything, made it dangerous. Not in the way gunmen were dangerous, not in the way deserts were, but in the quiet, steady way that truth can be dangerous, when it's not denied, not twisted, not feared, just seen. The stranger on the ridge had been watching for 3 days. Never moved, never descended, never raised a hand or voice. Just sat there, upright on a pale horse, outlined against the sun like something carved from the horizon itself. May had taken to checking the ridge every morning before she opened the saloon. She didn't use a spyglass, didn't need to. She just stood on the steps, wiped her hands on her apron, and stared straight at him, as if daring him to do the same. She never blinked first. Inside, life went on, as much as it could. The dust lantern still served coffee in the morning, still swept its floors, still poured its whiskey in the same quiet, deliberate fashion. But something in the rhythm had shifted. Eli felt it most. He was too young to name it, but he knew when things were wrong. When silence wasn't peaceful, just heavy. When laughter came too sharp. When no one wanted to go outside alone. That morning, he asked the question everyone was thinking. Why doesn't someone ride up there and talk to him? May looked up from polishing a bottle. Because he didn't come to talk. Eli frowned. Then what did he come for? Reminder, said Cole, emerging from the shadows near the stairs. The boy turned to him. Reminder of what? Cole's boots hit the floor soft and even. He walked past the poker table, past the untouched piano, and joined May at the bar. That not all towns are willing to forget, he said. The hollow preacher spoke from his usual corner, voice low and even. In most places, folks look away from the things they can't explain. They let the rot fester under their feet and pretend it smells like fresh dirt. He looked around. But not here. Marlin Gray came in from the morning air, hat in hand, chewing on the edge of a thought. He's still up there. May didn't need to ask. He's not just watching, Marlin said. He's measuring. Measuring what? Eli asked. Our spine, said Cole. The room fell quiet. Then May turned to Eli and asked softly, "Do you know what happened to the general store back in '68? Eli blinked. It caught fire. Do you know why? He shook his head. May set the bottle down. Because the owner's brother was stealing food from the back and reselling it to the miners for triple. When the owner found out, he tried to cover it up. But the town found out anyway. Eli leaned in. What happened? May folded her arms. We didn't run him out. We didn't hang him. We didn't bury it. We gathered in the square, heard the full story, both sides, and when it was all said, the owner lit the first match. Said he'd rather burn it than build on a lie. The boy was silent. Marlin added, he rebuilt it, same corner, no plaque, but every nail in those walls remembers. Cole leaned against the bar. That's what makes Bitterweed Hollow different. Eli looked up at them all, voice small. But it's just a town. No, said the preacher. It's a place where the truth doesn't get buried with the dead. Outside, the wind picked up, and still the figure on the ridge didn't move. As noon passed, other townsfolk came and went. The tailor, the widow, the old trapper who only came into town for beans and bullets. They all glanced toward the hills, but no one said a word. The town had decided. They would not send a rider. They would not send a warning. They would not look away. They would be seen for what they were, for who they were, flawed, tired, scarred, but honest. That night, as lanterns flickered to life and shadows stretched long down the street, Eli stepped outside the dust lantern alone. He looked up. The rider was still there. The boy raised his hand, not in greeting, not in fear, just in acknowledgement. He saw, and he was not afraid to be seen, not in the streets where dust had long since settled, nor in the ears of those who had heard it, but in the hollow space just beneath the heart, that place where memory lives alongside fear, and where the sound of a bullet not meant to kill can ring louder than any death. Cole Ashburn stood unmoving in the center of the street, his shadow long beneath the pale gaze of Bitterweed Hollow's lanterns. His hands never reached for his pistols. His boots did not shift, only his breath betrayed him, shallow, measured, thick, with something heavier than relief. The gun hadn't fired at him, but it had fired all the same. That meant something. May watched from the doorway, her fingers wrapped white-knuckled around the door frame. She didn't call out, didn't ask if he was all right. She knew better. She knew the wound was not in the flesh. It was in the choice. And that kind of wound doesn't bleed where others can see it. Inside, the dust lantern returned. To silence, Eli stepped away from the window, jaw tight, heart thudding. He had never seen a duel, never witnessed two men speak through the language of loaded weapons and unfinished sentences. And what rattled him most wasn't that no one died. It was that someone could have, and didn't. The hollow preacher lowered his head. He whispered, barely audible, "A gun that doesn't fire still speaks." Marlin Gray took another sip of his whiskey, eyes narrowed toward the stairs. He didn't speak. Not yet. Cole finally moved. He turned from the street, his gait slower than before. Not heavy, not shaken, but older. He walked like someone who had carried a coffin only to find it empty. He stepped onto the saloon porch and paused. May hadn't moved. They looked at one another across the threshold. No words passed, none needed. Then he entered, boots thudding softly on the warped floorboards. Eli approached cautiously. Why didn't he shoot? Cole sat down at the bar, gently removing his hat. Because I didn't. Eli frowned. But you could have drawn. I could have, Cole agreed. So why didn't you? He looked at the boy. Not hard, not stern. Just with the eyes of a man who had seen enough. Because the past don't bleed better when you shoot it, he said. It just leaves new stains. May poured him a drink. No words. Just the clink of glass and the whisper of rye. He drank it slow. The hollow preacher spoke next. Mercy is a form of justice, but it never tastes sweet. Cole nodded. No, it don't. They sat in silence for a long while. The saloon breathing again, faintly. Chairs creaked. The candle near the ledger danced against the wall. Marlin finally broke the quiet. I knew Cobb would come back, he said, almost to himself. Didn't know he'd leave with a bullet still in the chamber. Cole looked up. Men change. Marlin smiled slightly. Or they get tired. That too hung in the air like a truth nobody wanted to say aloud. Eli sat beside Cole, his voice low. Did you know him well? We were law together once, Cole said. He believed in hanging men before asking why they ran. Eli blinked. And you didn't? I used to. What changed? Cole turned his glass in slow circles on the bar. A man begged me to tell his daughter why he'd never come home, said her name, gave me a letter, and I realized I didn't know if he was guilty. The room held that sentence carefully. Cole continued, voice distant. I hung him anyway, because orders said to, and I never found the daughter. Just the memory of what he said. Eli whispered, So you quit? I didn't quit, Cole said. I stopped following. That's not the same. May placed her hand on the bar beside his. Not touching, just near. Enough. Later that night, when the saloon emptied, and the lamps were snuffed to half glow, May found the boy sitting alone at the piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys. You all right? She asked. He looked up, startled. Yeah, I think so. What are you doing? Trying to feel what he felt, Eli said. Standing there, not drawing. May leaned against the frame. You'll feel it one day, she said. And you'll know then. Know what? If your hand shakes. She walked away before he could answer. Upstairs, Cole opened the book again. The name Ransom was already written there. Years ago, back when the hurt was still hot. He didn't cross it out, didn't add anything. He just stared at it. The gun hadn't fired, but something had ended, and something else, something heavier, had begun. It didn't list debts. It wasn't bound for business. It wasn't even supposed to exist. Wrapped in a swath of faded wool and tied with an old bootlace, the book lived beneath the till, behind the drawer that stuck when the summer air swelled the wood. Most nights, it stayed there, silent, settled, content in the dark. But not tonight. That evening, the sky over Bitterweed Hollow had turned the colour of bruised plum. Thunder grumbled far away but didn't come any closer. Rain had been promised, but never arrived. The lamps flickered, the dust refused to settle, and the saloon, though not empty, was hushed. Cole had gone to bed early. Eli was cleaning out the back, humming some half-learned tune under his breath. The hollow preacher was still awake, but he sat near the window, unmoving, lost in his own kind of prayer. May stood alone behind the bar. Her hands moved without needing her mind, wiping, straightening, setting out clean glasses. But her thoughts were elsewhere. Her gaze slid toward the old drawer, and tonight, for reasons she didn't question, she opened it. The wool cloth felt warm, as if it remembered her touch. She untied the lace and unfolded the bundle carefully, the way you'd unwrap something sacred. The book beneath was small and square, the leather scuffed, the corners softened by years. She opened it to the middle. A name greeted her, written in slanted, feminine script. Nellie Thorne danced until her shoes split, said goodbye in silence, left a blue ribbon tied to the stair rail, never returned. May traced the ink lightly with her fingertip, then turned the page. Virgil done. Came to forget a war. Forgot his own name first. Died with a smile and a flask full of wind. Another page. Silas Grove. Tall, cruel, broken. Spoke. Kindly to dogs and no one else. Shot twice in the chest, once in the back. No one claimed the body. Each entry had a rhythm, a certain quiet grace. 5 or 6 lines at most, never more. They weren't obituaries, they weren't records, they were remembrances. The saloon had its ledgers, sure. Proper books full of owed coin, broken stools, and bar tabs that would never be paid. But this book, May's book, was different. This one was for the lives that didn't leave behind receipts. It was for the people who mattered only because she chose to say they did. She turned to the final written page. The most recent name was neatly penned, Ransom Cobb, came back with a gun, left with something heavier, a man carved from past mistakes, carried silence like a shield. May paused there a long time. She thought of the dust that trailed him, of the way he didn't fire, of the look in Cole's eyes when it was over. Then, slowly, she turned to the next blank page. She didn't write anything just yet. Instead, she reached for the folded scrap of paper tucked into the front cover. A name, scrawled in Cole's hand, still legible despite the crease. Stay. She had found it weeks ago, meant to return it, but hadn't. And now, it felt like part of the book. She set it aside gently, then dipped her pen in ink. She paused for a long moment, tapping the quill against the edge of the bar, then wrote Joshua Lane, forgot who he was, remembered through music, brought back a song the town had buried, played the past into something gentler. The ink glistened wetly. May blew on it, soft as breath. She didn't know if Joshua would stay, but she knew she had to write him down now, before the story folded in on itself. Across the room, the hollow preacher stirred and stood. He walked toward her slowly, hands behind his back, boots brushing the floor like wind through dry grass. Writing. History again? He asked. May didn't look up. Not history, memory. He reached the bar, leaning just enough to see the book. He smiled. I suppose it's the same thing if you do it right. She nodded. I've been meaning to ask, he said. Am I in there? She met his eyes. You've always been in here. He seemed to consider that. Then he said, Tell me what you wrote. May smiled faintly, turning a page back. She read aloud. The hollow preacher carried no sermons, only stillness, heard more sins than he forgave, but listened longer than any man alive, never raised his voice, never needed to. The preacher lowered his head, his mouth folding into something like gratitude. Then I suppose I've already had my eulogy, he murmured. May didn't answer. She closed the book slowly, rewrapped it in wool, and tied it shut. It didn't feel heavy. Not yet, but she knew it would. One day, she placed it gently back into the drawer and slid it shut. The flame above her dimmed, but didn't die. In Bitterweed Hollow, stories rarely ended clean. They frayed, they drifted, but they never disappeared. Not. As long as someone remembered the names. And May, bartender, keeper, witness, would remember. Always. Dust clung to him like a second skin. His boots were cracked, the soles near to splitting. His coat had once been dark green but was now more dirt than fabric. He wore no gun, no hat, and no trail behind him. He simply appeared on the edge of town. a figure on the horizon that drifted closer with the sun behind him, until he stepped through the saloon doors with hands trembling and eyes wide. May looked up from behind the bar. The hollow preacher stirred in his chair. Eli, stacking, kindling near the hearth, froze. The man blinked against the change in light. Is this Kansas?" he asked, voice dry as a paper-thin whisper. May didn't answer right away. She came around the bar, stepping slowly. "No," she said gently. "This is Bitterweed Hollow." He frowned. "That's not where I was going." May nodded. "Few ever are." The man swayed slightly. Eli moved to offer a chair, and the man collapsed into it with a breath of dust and relief. He leaned forward, fingers knotted together like twisted rope. "I don't remember my name," he said. May crouched beside him, her voice soft. "That happens sometimes. I remember a fire," he continued, "or maybe a gunshot, and the sound of water, and someone saying run. But after that," he shook his head. "It's all just pieces." Eli brought him a glass of water, and the man drank it slowly, hands shaking so hard some of it spilled down his chin. The hollow preacher rose, walked over, and studied him. "Do you remember if you were running from something?" The man's eyes welled suddenly, not with fear, but shame. "I think I was, but not why." He shook his head. May stood, motioned for Eli to fetch a bowl of stew from the back, and returned behind the bar. She watched the man as he looked around, trying to place the space around him. The way his eyes lingered on the mirror behind the bottles, then on the piano, then on the empty fireplace. "Feels like I've been here before," he said aloud, though more to himself than anyone else. May didn't flinch. "Everything feels familiar when you don't know where you've been," she said. He looked up at her, then truly looked, and she saw in him the outline of someone long ago. Not a man she knew, but a shape she recognized. The kind who had seen too much, lost too much, and come searching for something without knowing what. Eli returned with the stew, and the man ate like it was the first warmth he'd known in years. When he was done, he sat back, eyes distant again. The hollow preacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your name will come," the man whispered, "and if it don't, then you build a new one," May said simply. He looked toward the piano. "I played once. You remember how?" He shook his head. May stepped over, pulled out the bench, and nodded toward it. "Try." The man stared, then rose. He moved like someone much younger, almost with reverence, and sat before the keys. His fingers hovered above the ivory for a long time. Then slowly, shakily, they pressed down. The sound was broken at first, awkward, halting, then smoother. A melody took shape, thin, unsure, but real. The same four-note progression, repeated, like a heartbeat. The hollow preacher closed his eyes. May leaned against the bar, lips parting. Eli watched with awe as the man who had no name began to find one in the rhythm, and then the man stopped. He stared at his hands. "I remember this song. What's it called?" May asked. His voice trembled. "It's not a name. It's a place, a field, near water, with white stones." "Gravestones?" the preacher asked quietly. The man didn't answer. He stood. "May I stay here? For a bit?" May nodded. "You may, as long as you need." He sat back down at the table near the window, the same one where many had sat and found, or lost, themselves. The hollow preacher returned to his seat without a word. Eli came to May's side. "You think he's dangerous?" May stared at the man, now humming softly to himself. "No," she said, "but I think something dangerous loved him once." That evening, the man asked for a bed. May gave him the room that used to belong to a miner named Tilson, a man who disappeared one winter night and was never seen again. The room smelled of old ash and dried tobacco. It had a single window and a view of the chapel bell that no longer rang. He thanked her as he went upstairs, his footsteps slow, steady. That night, Bitterweed Hollow slept with one more shadow among its walls, and somewhere in the space between sleep and memory, a name waited patiently to be remembered. Not with a pop, not with smoke, just a slow, trembling fade, as though the flame had finally exhaled and chosen not to draw in again. May noticed it while closing up. It was the third lantern along the bar, the one that always cast a soft light on the bottle of rye she kept for men who didn't speak much. For years it had burned through dust storms, snow, and nights filled with noise and regret. But now it had grown quiet, duller than dusk. She tapped the side of the glass. The flame wobbled, then surrendered. May stood for a long time with the empty lantern in her hands. She didn't refill it, didn't relight it. She simply set it aside. One flame doesn't mean much in a saloon full of shadows, until it's the first to go. The second went out 2 nights later. The lantern above the back stairs. It had been there since the dust lantern was nailed together. Folks used to say it never dimmed, not even when the storm of '67 knocked half the roof off. Now it barely coughed before darkening completely. Cole noticed it. He stood at the foot of the stairs, boots on the 4th creaking step, and stared up at the empty hook where the light had once hung. He didn't say anything, just descended the stairs in silence. Lantern by lantern, the saloon grew dimmer. No reason, no damage. The eye. Oil was good, the wicks were trimmed, but the fire was weary. Eli tried to replace one, thought maybe it was a defect, hung a new glass, new metal. But when he lit it, the flame danced briefly, then sputtered low, lower than it should have, like the very air had forgotten how to hold warmth. By the end of the week, 4 lanterns were gone. May called it nothing, told Eli to keep the others clean, told Cole she wasn't worried, but she swept slower, polished less, stared more. One night, she stood with the hollow preacher beside the bar, looking out across the quiet room. The poker table was empty, the piano untouched, the corners darker than usual. Used to be, May whispered. This place glowed like a firefly nest in summer, the preacher nodded. And now it feels like dusk, no matter what time it is. He said nothing for a moment. Then, maybe that's what dusk is, the hour when a place starts remembering more than it dreams. May turned her head. Is it wrong to want it to burn bright again? No, he said, but it's human, which means it might not be possible. Later that evening, Eli stood on a stool relighting one of the stubborn lanterns. He fumbled with the match, struck it twice before it took. Marlin watched from the corner and muttered, "Let it go, boy. If it doesn't want to burn, maybe it ain't meant to." Eli turned. "Everything's meant to burn if you give it a reason." Marlin raised an eyebrow. "You talking about lanterns or people?" Eli shrugged. "Ain't they the same?" Cole came through the doors just then, catching only the tail end of that question. He paused and said, "People burn slower." He walked to the bar and poured a glass of water, not whiskey. "Not tonight." May looked up at him. "You feel it?" "I do." "What is it?" He thought for a long moment. Then, "Something's winding down." May nodded. The next day, the ridge was empty. The stranger had gone. No one saw him leave. No one heard his horse descend the slope. No tracks were found. Just a stretch of sky above a hill now bare. The relief should have been loud. It was not. The absence felt heavier than the presence, because the town had been seen, and now it had been left to wait. For what? No one could say. That evening, May lit candles instead of lanterns, one on the bar, one on the piano, one near the door. She didn't say why. Eli didn't ask, but he helped. The candles burned clean, gentle. They threw flickering shadows that made the dust lantern feel smaller, but somehow safer. Cole sat at the far table, watching the flames. After a time, he spoke. "You ever think this place has a heartbeat?" May glanced at him. "All the time. What happens when it stops?" She smiled, soft and sad. "Then it joins the rest of us." Outside, the wind stirred softly. A horse snorted in a stable, and somewhere deep within the saloon, a floorboard settled with a sigh. That night, Bitterweed Hollow slept beneath the gaze of a sky with no rider, and a saloon that shone not with oil, but with memory, because lanterns don't burn forever, but sometimes a single flame, quiet and still, can hold the dark at bay for one more night. The sky was a thin shade of grey, neither night nor dawn, just that strange in-between where the stars hesitate to leave and the sun hasn't made up its mind. The boards beneath his boots creaked in familiar complaint. Wood that knew his, weight better than any woman ever had. He didn't carry his guns this morning. He didn't need to. They were up in his room, resting like old bones in a drawer lined with cloth. Quiet and quicker, their barrels cold, their stories finished, or nearly so. Cole lit a cigarette and leaned against the railing. His breath came in thin puffs of smoke and morning chill. There was ash in everything now. He could feel it behind. His eyes under his nails caught in the seams of his coat, not the kind from fire alone, but the residue of things burned long ago. Bridges, chances, names he'd forgotten on purpose. Ash from promises that turned to dust. But amid the ash, there were still embers, and Cole had lived long enough to know the difference. He remembered nights on the trail, when the fire died down and you thought it gone. Then, with a little breath, a little coaxing, a flicker returned. That flicker could save your life. He hadn't felt that in years. But lately, something was warming again. It wasn't forgiveness. No, that was a luxury. But maybe acceptance. Behind him, the saloon was quiet. May would still be in her room, curled into herself like a question no one dared answer. Eli likely stirred already, dreaming half-boy, half-man dreams of saving or being saved. The hollow preacher never slept in the way others did. He drifted instead, like a psalm waiting to be sung. And Marlin? Cole smiled faintly. That man had a soul made of mirrors. You could look into him and only see yourself, twisted and sly. But even mirrors crack. Cole looked out across the street. The wind stirred dust, but didn't lift it. He watched the chapel, still missing its bell, and the signpost beyond it, warped with time, where old directions pointed to places that no longer existed. It reminded him of his own body. Once, he'd been a map, a guide for men with vengeance, in their bellies, a path etched in six-shot steel and trail blood. Now, he was a border, not past, not future, just in between. He stubbed out the cigarette on the railing, flicked the butt into the dust, then picked it up again, ashamed of the instinct. He slipped it into his pocket. Even now, he respected the dirt more than he did himself. From behind, the door creaked open. He didn't turn. May stepped out, her hair still pinned but loose around the ears. A wool shawl wrapped tight around her arms. She carried 2 mugs. She handed him one. He took it without a word. They stood together in silence for a while. Steam rose between them like a ghost from the cup. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked eventually. He shook his head. Didn't want to. Same. He sipped. It was strong, black, slightly burnt, just how he liked it. May leaned on the post beside him. "You ever think about what comes after?" she asked. He gave her a sidelong glance. "After what?" "All of it." He took a slow breath. "I used to think there was a place, quiet, maybe, where you could lay your guns down and your name didn't follow. And now I think, maybe what comes after is whatever we leave behind. In people. In places." She nodded. Ash and ember. He smiled. Exactly. May turned to face him. Then what ember are you still carrying, Cole? He met her eyes. For years I thought it was guilt, he said. But now, I'm starting to think it's you. She didn't flinch, didn't blush, just breathed in sharply through her nose, as if his words had loosened something tightly wound. I won't be here forever, she said softly. No, he agreed. Neither will this place. No, but you might. That caught him. The idea. Him outlasting the dust lantern, the town, even May, felt impossible and cruel. But she meant it. Because some embers don't burn for warmth. They burn to bear witness. They stood that way until the sun finally breached the horizon, not proud, but hesitant. Like it too. Wasn't sure Bitterweed Hollow deserved a new day. Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny slip of paper. On it, a single word. One he hadn't written, but found in May's ledger weeks ago when she wasn't looking. He handed it to her. She opened it. It read, "Stay." She folded it, pressed it into her palm, and looked back out toward the waking town. Neither spoke again. Because some mornings don't need words, they only need embers. Just one. Low, uncertain, struck like a question. The night had grown quiet around the dust lantern. Outside, Bitterweed Hollow lay in shadow, its streets windless, the chapel dark. But inside the saloon, a light had been lit that wasn't why. Flame. It came from the piano. For months, the instrument had stood silent, like a monument to the things nobody dared remember. Its ivory keys had yellowed, and the polish had faded from its wood. But it had not died. No, it had waited. And now, at last, someone touched it again. The man without a name sat hunched on the bench, shoulders sloped forward, his fingers trembling, as they hovered above the keys. The others had left him alone there. May, in her quiet wisdom, had merely nodded when he took the seat. She knew better than to ask. Eli was the first to hear it. That note. He stopped sweeping and turned. Then came another note. Higher. Hesitant. Then a third. By the fifth, the hollow preacher had stirred in his seat, leaning forward like a man hearing an old hymn. May, behind the bar, looked up from her ledger. The sound was not pretty. Not yet. It was jagged, uneven, like something being remembered while it was, still being learned. But beneath the wrong notes and halted chords, there was something unmistakable, a melody, a story, a name trying to speak. And then, just like that, it found itself. The song changed. It flowed. The man closed his eyes and, his hands moved without thought. The melody grew confident, soft and sorrowful, blooming like a flower no one expected to live through the winter. The piano spoke again, and the saloon listened. Eli approached, slow. He sat near the hearth, cross-legged like a boy waiting for tales. May didn't speak. She folded her arms and watched, heart tight in her chest. The hollow preacher whispered something no one heard, and the song went on. It was a waltz, or something close to it. The kind of tune played in riverside halls, long ago, before war, before hunger, before names were traded for bullets. It twisted like smoke and fell like dusk. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Because in Bitterweed Hollow, music was never about sound. It was about memory. The man played until his hands slowed, then stopped. Silence returned. But it was different now, warmer, full. He opened his eyes. Did I play that? Eli nodded, breath caught in wonder. Yes, sir. The man looked down at his hands. They remembered. Even when I couldn't. May stepped forward. Do you know it? She asked gently. The name of the song. He blinked. His lips moved. Then a whisper. Ash River Waltz. She froze. Cole, seated near the back with a glass untouched, looked up sharply. "What did you say?" he asked. The man turned. "Ash River Waltz. I wrote it. Long ago, before I forgot who I was." May stepped closer. "Your name," she said softly. "Do you remember now?" He hesitated, then nodded. "My name is Joshua Lane." The hollow preacher exhaled like he'd been holding the breath for years. Cole leaned forward, stunned. "You're Joshua Lane?" The man nodded again. "That used to be me." May put a hand to her mouth. "You were the music teacher in Dry Bluff. They said you vanished during the fire. Folks thought you were gone." "I was," he said. "I walked into the flames and never came out the same. But your music," Eli whispered, "it came with you." Joshua Lane, now no longer a stranger, looked at the piano. "I thought I lost everything," he said. "But music, it hid, it waited." May reached across the bar and pulled a bottle down, one reserved for rare moments. She poured a small glass and handed it to him. For returning, he took it with both hands. "To remembering," he said. They all drank. And for the first time in a long time, the dust lantern echoed with something other than regret. It echoed with song. Joshua played again, softer this time, familiar chords, gentle harmonies. And one by one, the others joined him. Eli clapped the rhythm on his knees. May hummed quietly. Even Marlin, who had come down at the sound, leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes closed. Cole watched it all, with a strange look on his face, part wonder, part ache. After the song ended, he stood and approached the piano. "Do you know another?" he asked. Joshua Lane smiled faintly. "I know hundreds, but only one matters now." "Which?" "The next one." He lifted his hands and played again. The night passed like that, with music, with quiet laughter, with the kind of silence that's not empty, but full. And when the last note faded, it hung in the air like a candle's breath, flickering, soft, but unforgotten. The night the music returned, Bitterweed Hollow remembered itself, not by what it had lost, but by what had remained. It slid up over the ridge in a muted hush, more silver than gold, casting long gentle beams through the thin lace of the morning mist. Bitterweed Hollow didn't stir quickly, and that was the way of the town, but on this particular morning, the hush felt different. Final somehow. The dust lanterns still stood, every board creaking as it always had. The lanterns that hadn't been trimmed now held cold glass and curled wicks. A few still glowed faintly, tired embers catching one last draught of warmth. May stood behind the bar, her hair unpinned and falling softly down her back. She wore the same shawl as the night before, though the air wasn't cold. Her fingers traced the edge of a chipped glass, round and round. She wasn't waiting for anyone, just thinking. Eli emerged from the back room slowly, rubbing his eyes with one hand, holding a folded sheet of music in the other. His boots were mismatched, left foot still belonging to yesterday, but he smiled. "Morning," he said. May nodded. "It is." He looked around. "Feels like nothing's going to happen today." May gave him the smallest smile. "That's how you know something has." The hollow preacher sat where he always did, his chair pulled slightly away from the window, his hands resting on the arms like a man no longer holding anything but air. His eyes were open, soft with age, and he seemed less like a man and more like a memory made gentle. On the far side of the saloon, Joshua Lane stood beside the piano, not playing it, just touching the edge, as if to prove it had truly sung again. Cole Ashburn entered through the front door, as quietly as he'd ever done anything. He wasn't armed, he wasn't tired. He simply looked still. He tipped his head to May. She didn't nod, but the look in her eyes was all the reply he needed. He walked to the center of the saloon and stood for a long time, listening. To what? Only he knew. After a while, he approached Joshua. "You stayin'?" Cole asked. Joshua considered. "I think I might. There's room for another song or two in this place." Joshua smiled. "There's room in me again to play them." Eli slid onto a stool at the bar and unfolded the paper in his hand. "What's that?" May asked. He grinned shyly. "It's a title." "Of what?" He turned the paper to show her. The letters were crooked, the ink smudged, but legible. "The Ballad of the Bitterweed." May laughed, soft and low. "That sounds like something this town would hate." "Then it must be honest," Eli said. May reached across the bar and ruffled his hair. "Sing it one day." He nodded. "When I've got the rest of the words." They sat in quiet for a time. No one needed to leave. No one had somewhere else to be. It wasn't like that anymore. The hollow preacher stood suddenly, and the room seemed to still in his wake. He walked slowly to the center, placed one hand on the edge of a table, and looked around. "This place," he said, voice calm, "was not holy ground, but it was held together by grace, by memory, and by a kind of hope only found where the world forgets to look." He turned to May. "You kept it." She shook her head. "It kept us." He nodded. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a small bundle, wrapped in faded cloth, tied with leather string. He handed it to her. "What is it?" she asked. "The first sermon I never gave. I wrote it for a town like this." May unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a single page. At the top, in uneven ink, were the words, "When the smoke clears, may your heart still be kind." She read it twice, then folded it again and tucked it under the bar. Not hidden, just home. Outside, the sun rose higher. Joshua walked to the door and opened it wide. Light poured in, and for the first time in weeks, the saloon didn't flinch. From it, Cole stood beside him. Looked out. "What now?" Joshua asked. Cole shrugged. "We sit, we remember, maybe we mend. And after that, then maybe we rest." May poured a cup of coffee for each of them. No rush, no ceremony. She placed one in front of Eli, one before the preacher, and one in front of the empty stool where Rook Garvey once sat. No one said anything about it, but they all drank. One by one, the chairs filled. Marlin arrived late, as always, and brought nothing but a raised eyebrow and a nod. He sat in the corner and crossed his arms. The room was full, but not crowded. Warm, but not loud. Alive, but not afraid of quiet. And when the wind stirred again outside, it was not a warning. It was a blessing. May looked around. At the preacher, at the boy, at the man who found his music, at the man who laid his guns down, at the saloon that held them all. She lifted her cup. "To nothing more," she said. They all drank, and Bitterweed Hollow, at last, was still.